I came home from the hospital alone that Thursday evening, and the first thing I noticed was that my husband's car wasn't in the driveway. That should have been the first thing I noticed. Instead, what actually stopped me cold was the flowers on the kitchen counter, a bouquet of pale pink peonies wrapped in brown paper from the upscale florist on Lexington, the one he always passed on his way back from the airport. He'd been in Denver for 10 days. A conference, he'd said, Surgical Innovation Symposium. He'd even sent me a photo of his hotel room, the one with the mountain view. I was 31 years old, 6 weeks postpartum, still wearing the nursing bra I'd put on at 5 in the morning. Our daughter Nora, the baby, was asleep in the snoo upstairs. I stood in the kitchen looking at those flowers for a long time. My mother had come down from Buffalo to help me the first 2 weeks. She'd left on a Sunday. My husband had left on a Monday. Those were the worst 10 days of my life, and I hadn't told anyone that. I set my keys on the counter next to the peonies. There was no card. My name is Mara. I was a forensic accountant for 11 years. The last 4 at a mid-sized firm in Midtown where I specialised in fraud detection and litigation support. When my daughter was born 6 weeks premature, we made the decision together that I would take extended leave. That was what I'd agreed to. That was what I thought we'd agreed to. I picked up the bouquet. At the base of the wrapping, barely visible, was a Venmo receipt that had gotten tucked in. Not his Venmo, a personal one I didn't recognise. The charge said thank you for everything with a small pink heart emoji, sent 3 days ago, from Denver. I put the flowers back down very carefully. I went upstairs, checked on the baby, and then I sat on the edge of our bed in the dark for about 45 minutes. Then I got up and I went to work. He came home the next morning. I was in the kitchen feeding the baby when he walked in, rolling his carry-on behind him, already loosening his tie. He kissed me on the forehead. He kissed the baby on the forehead. He said the flight had been delayed out of Dyer and he was exhausted. He smelled like hotel soap and something floral I didn't recognise. "Did you bring flowers?" I asked. He glanced at the counter. "Thought you could use some colour in here, that was sweet." He went upstairs to shower. I burped the baby against my shoulder and stared at the peonies and felt something in my chest go very, very quiet. Not sad, not angry, just quiet. Like the moment before a verdict comes back. I need you to understand something about how I was trained. At my firm, we used to say that the most dangerous frauds weren't the sloppy ones. They were the ones where the perpetrator genuinely believed they were too smart to get caught. That belief made them careless in a specific way, not in the obvious places, but in the small ones. The throwaway details, the Venmo receipt tucked into a florist's wrapping, the slight hesitation before answering a simple question. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I started with his credit card statements, the joint card which I had full access to, and the Amex Platinum in his name alone, for which I happened to know the login because I'd set it up for him 3 years ago and he'd never changed the password. My husband was a cardiothoracic surgeon. He made good money. He also, it turned out, spent a remarkable amount of it in ways I had never been shown. The Denver Ritz-Carlton. 2 rooms charged to his card, but only 1 to the hospital's expense account. A spa charge for 2. A dinner at Elway's for $340 on a Tuesday night when he told me he was presenting at the conference. A jewelry sheets purchase at a boutique on Larimer Street, $200, charged to the personal Amex 3 days before he came home with peonies and no card. I cross-referenced his flight records using his frequent flyer number, which I also had because I was the one who'd organised his travel profile when we got married. The conference had ended on Wednesday. His flight home was Friday morning. He'd extended the trip by 2 days. He had told me he was delayed. The baby was asleep in the bouncer next to my desk. I wrote everything down in a spreadsheet I kept on a flash drive, not on our shared cloud. I'm going to tell you the hardest part now because I think about it every day. 2 weeks before my husband left for Denver, our daughter had a well visit with the paediatrician. She'd been born at 34 weeks and she was gaining weight slowly but steadily. The doctor said she was on track but to watch her feeding. 3 days after he left, she started to seem more sluggish than usual. She wasn't waking up to eat. I called the after-hours nurse line at 2 in the morning and they told me to monitor her. The next morning, she was yellow, not golden baby yellow, a wrong yellow. I drove to the pediatric urgent care myself, car seat in the back of my Subaru, calling my husband's cell on the way and getting voicemail. The doctor checked her bilirubin. It was elevated enough to warrant immediate hospitalization. They admitted her to the NICU at New York Presbyterian that afternoon. She was there for 6 days. I signed every consent form. I slept in the recliner next to her isolette every night. I pumped milk in a storage room off the NICU hallway. My husband called me back 11 hours after I'd first reached out. He said he was sorry. He'd been in sessions all day. He'd been out of cell range. He asked if she was serious. I said yes. He said he was going to try to move his flight up. He did not move his flight up. When he finally came home and I asked him why, he said the hospital administration had needed him to complete his post-conference obligations. He said the doctors had told him she was going to be fine. He said, "You had it handled. I had it handled. I didn't say anything." I just looked at him and nodded, and then I waited. I found her Instagram 2 weeks later. Her name was Petra. No, different name. I'm not going to use her name here. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep. She was 26. She had one of those accounts full of upscale travel content, rooftop bars, business class flat beds, linen blazers in lobby bars. In her most recent grid post from Denver, she was holding a glass of champagne with a mountain view behind her. The caption was about making memories with the people who matter. In her stories archive, there was a boomerang of a pair of hands. I recognized his signet ring, pouring wine at what was clearly Elway's. She'd used a location tag. She'd posted it while my daughter was in the NICU. I screen recorded everything before I closed the app. I want to be clear about something. There is a version of this story where I screamed at him, where I threw things, where I confronted her. I understand why people do that. I also know from 11 years of forensic work that the moment you show your hand is the moment the other side starts destroying evidence and moving assets. I did not show my hand. Instead, I called my sister. She's a family law attorney in Philadelphia. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do not move anything. Do not change anything. Document everything you can access legally. And don't tell him you know." I said, "How long?" She said, "Until you're ready." He was performing surgery on a Tuesday morning when I met with the attorney my sister had referred me to. A woman named Miss Okafor, who had offices in Midtown and a reputation my sister described as methodical and devastating. I brought a printed copy of the spreadsheet, the screen recordings, and a timeline I'd assembled from his flight records, hotel charges, and social media activity. Miss Okafor looked at everything for a long time without speaking. "You said you're a forensic accountant," she finally said. "Was," I said. "Ah," she said. "This is better than what most investigators bring me." She explained the strategy. We would file for equitable distribution under New York law. The key was the dissipation of marital assets, the jewelry, the hotel charges, the extensions of business trips, using shared credit to fund personal travel with a third party. Combined with the pattern of willful absence during a documented medical emergency affecting our child, we had a compelling picture. She could also petition for a temporary restraining order on his personal accounts before he was served to prevent asset transfers. I asked about the baby, about custody. Miss Okafor set down her pen. "Has he been the primary caregiver at any point?" I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "She was in the NICU for 6 days. He didn't come." She wrote something down. "We'll include that in the petition." He was served on a Wednesday. I was not home when it happened. I had taken the baby to my sister's in Philadelphia, which was something I had arranged 3 weeks earlier, quietly, the way I do everything when I'm working a case. He called me 11 times before I picked up. His voice sounded like I had never heard it before. Not angry, exactly. Unmoored, like a man who had just discovered that the ground he'd been standing on was actually a trap door. "Mara," he said, "what is this?" "It's a petition for divorce," I said. "And a temporary asset freeze on your personal accounts." "You can't. How did you?" He stopped, started again. "Who helped you do this?" Silence. "Mara, I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake. We can talk about this. We can go to counselling. I'll end it completely. I swear to you, it's already. She was yellow, I said. He went quiet. Our daughter was yellow and I drove to urgent care alone at 8 in the morning and she was admitted to the NICU and I called you and you didn't come home. I wasn't crying. I want you to know I wasn't crying. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. And I need you to understand that I know the difference. I ended the call. I didn't pick up again that night. What happened next, I am going to tell you as plainly as I can, because I think that's the only way it makes sense. His personal accounts were frozen pending the asset review. The joint accounts remained accessible to me. Miss Okafor filed an emergency motion citing the dissipation of marital assets and attaching 63 pages of supporting documentation. The motion was granted in 48 hours. The pharmaceutical rep, I found out later, through his own attorney's filings, that she had ended things the same week he was served. Her name appeared twice in the discovery documents, and both times as a liability he was trying to minimize rather than a person he was protecting. He did not fight for her. He fought for his accounts. I tell you that not because I felt sorry for her. I tell you that because I want you to understand exactly what he had actually been invested in. It took 8 months to settle. By the end, he had agreed to a parenting plan where I had primary physical custody and he had scheduled visitation every other weekend and one weekday evening, supervised for the first 6 months by a parenting coordinator. The supervised requirement was his attorney's opening concession before I even asked for it. I think his attorney saw the NICU documentation and made a strategic calculation. He kept his surgical practice. He kept his apartment on the Upper East Side. He paid child support at the statutory maximum for his income level, and he agreed to maintain our daughter on his employer health insurance, until she was 26. I kept the house. I kept the brokerage accounts we'd opened together in the first year of our marriage. I kept the retirement fund I'd contributed to for 11 years before I took leave. He had thought, I think, that taking leave had made me dependent, that I had stepped back from the board and no longer knew where the pieces were. The thing about being a forensic accountant is that you never stop seeing the board. You just sometimes choose to let other people think you have. The year after the divorce was the hardest and the strangest year of my life simultaneously. I moved from our house in Westchester to a 2-bedroom apartment in Hoboken, which I know sounds like a downgrade and in some ways was, and in other ways was the first space I had chosen entirely for myself in 8 years. My daughter slept in the second bedroom. I set up a desk and I started consulting again. Part-time at first, then more. I had been good at my job. It turned out that being good at your job does not actually go away when you take maternity leave, which is something I had to relearn about myself. My daughter's name is not something I'm going to put here. What I will tell you is that she crawled at 9 months, walked at 13, and says no with a clarity and conviction that I find deeply encouraging. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, and I love her more than I have language for. He has his visitation. He has never once been late for pickup, which I did not expect. He bought her a stuffed animal, a rabbit, that she drags everywhere. I don't know what kind of father he is becoming. I only know what kind of father he was not, and I have to hold both things at once, which is the actual work of this. I want to tell you about the part that surprised me because I think it's the part people don't usually talk about. About 4 months after the settlement, I got a card in the mail. No return address, New York postmark. Inside, on plain cream notepaper in handwriting I didn't recognize, were 3 sentences. I owe you an apology I don't know how to make. I didn't know about the baby. I ended it the moment I found out. I read it standing at my mailbox in the lobby. I read it again. Then I put it back in the envelope and I held it for a long time. I am not telling you that I forgave her. I am not telling you I didn't. What I am telling you is that I thought about a 26-year-old woman who had apparently been told a version of our marriage that didn't include a baby in the NICU. And I thought about all the women in all the situations like that one. And I didn't feel the rage I had expected to feel. I felt something more complicated and more tired. I kept the card. It's in a folder with the NICU discharge papers and the divorce decree and a photo from our daughter's first birthday party. The one I threw in our Hoboken apartment with paper streamers and too much cake and every person I loved most in the world. She had frosting on her forehead in the photo. She was laughing. That folder is what this year actually looks like. My daughter is 2 now. Last month, she started in a toddler program 3 mornings a week at a co-op in Jersey City. On Thursdays, I drive her there myself, and then I go to my desk and I work for 3 hours. And that 3 hours is, I know this sounds small. It is not small to me. It is mine. I have been asked more than once whether I regret the way I handled things, whether I regret not confronting him earlier, whether I regret not fighting harder for the marriage. Here's what I actually regret. I regret the year before the Denver trip when I noticed things getting quieter between us and told myself it was just the stress of the pregnancy, just the adjustment, just the season we were in. I regret the way I had made myself smaller, professionally and otherwise, and told myself it was temporary. I regret not trusting my own eyes sooner. I don't regret the spreadsheet. I don't regret calling my sister. I don't regret sitting in that chair next to my daughter's isolette for 6 nights in a row, or signing every form, or driving home alone to a house where the flowers on the counter already didn't make sense. What I know now that I didn't know at 31 is that the skills you develop in your life do not belong to a job title. They belong to you. And when the moment comes that requires them, they will be there. Even when everything else feels like it's falling apart, especially then. My daughter is asleep right now in the next room. I can hear the white noise machine through the wall. I'm going to go check on her.